here, so please come fill in the spaces. I am just blown away by this wonderful turnout and want to thank you all for being here. This is kind of a momentous occasion for the Environmental Studies program. As many of you know, this is our 150th Lunch and Learn presentation, so it feels like quite a milestone. And when this was envisioned back in 2011, we thought it was an opportunity to bring our larger community, the students, the staff, the faculty, members of the Medford and Somerville communities, and people who can watch online to be able to come and learn about really diverse environmental issues that people are working on in all sorts of different ways. And so this has been a kind of like it feels like a newborn in a way that is now maturing. So thank you for helping it mature. The opportunities that have come out of these Lunch and Learns have been quite remarkable. Students have been finding internships and jobs relative to these things. New collaborations have emerged. And so I hope that you will always view these as not only an opportunity to live and learn, but an opportunity to network and find future opportunities. Let me tell you just a little bit about the Environmental Studies program, and then I'm going to introduce the Dean, and the Dean will be introducing today's speaker. Environmental Studies program was started in 1984, and it was one of the first interdisciplinary environmental studies programs in the country. It's basically designed to help sort of explore challenges and opportunities around environmental issues, looking for solutions, and thinking about ways of sort of creating a community of students and scholars around the environmental issues. Our program offers both majors and minors, and I think the timeliness of environmental issues that we're facing today, thus this talk, just goes to show you that there's real strong interest. The number of majors are growing, the attendance of these sessions like this have grown, and so it's a tribute to all of you and your engagement that this is successful. The program makes a lot of effort to try to network, provide sort of new connections. And an example of this is the Lunch and Learn, but we also have an Environmental Escapades where we take students to organizations in the area that are working on environmental issues, and if it's something you're interested in, you can go to our website to learn more. We have a weekly newsletter, and I just got an email today from a student who said, "Thank you so much for that newsletter. I found the internship for this summer at the Rodale Institute." So I just want to sort of give you the opportunity to get on our mailing list and or to get on our mailing list for the newsletter or for the Lunch and Learns. And I have a sign-up sheet that's going to go around, so if you're not already on it, please feel free to sign up. We have a previous Lunch and Learn speaker here, Alicia Hunt from the city of Medford. And I wanted to mention that was her coming here that started sort of a connection between environmental studies and the city of Medford, and now we have this really fantastic collaboration between Alicia Hunt and Ninian Stein, who is a lecturer in environmental studies. So welcome back, and it's glad to have you here. Raise your hand if you were a former intern at the city of Medford. There we go, 2. Excellent. So now more than ever, we really need to sort of explore ways to examine and find solutions to our environmental challenges through an interdisciplinary lens, and we hope that environmental studies is providing that platform. But of course, we don't do it alone. And it's really, at this point, I really want to stop and thank all the people who have helped the program. Of course, the students are first and foremost, but also there are lots of organizations around campus. And so I want to thank the Tufts Institute of the Environment that has been in this from the very beginning, and we have the Director of Environmental of the Tufts Institute of the Environment here, and the Assistant Director as well. And so without their assistance, I don't think this would have ever gotten off the ground, and they really helped support it over the years. Tisch College, normally we meet in the Rab Room, and then we've been collaborating and been able to sort of meet there, but we kind of had a feeling there'd be more people this week. So I think we guessed right. And we're always looking for new ways to collaborate with Tisch College as well. And then the deans of the Arts and Sciences School, the Environmental Studies program reports to those deans. They've been incredibly supportive over the years to the Environmental Studies program, and we're very, very thankful for their support. And I want to take this time now to introduce Dean Barbara Brizuela, who is the dean that oversees the Environmental Studies program. and to thank you so much for all the ways you've supported the program. You've always been available to talk about strategies and ideas, and please come up and let's give her a big hand. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Colin. I don't know that I deserve that, but thank you anyway. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Kenneth Kimmell. Ken Kimmell is a lawyer and a president of the Union of Concerned Scientists. The Union of Concerned Scientists is a leading science-based nonprofit that strives to ensure that science is used to build a healthy planet and a safer world. He has over 30 years of experience in government, environmental policy, and advocacy. Originally from New York, he completed his bachelor's degree at Wesleyan and his law degree at UCLA. He decided to focus his legal work on environmental issues after clerking for the U.S. District Court in San Francisco, where he assisted a judge in a case involving the health effects of Agent Orange. And he spent 17 years as a director and senior attorney at a Boston-based law firm specializing in environmental, energy, and land use issues. Recently, he has also become a strong voice in our collective fight against climate change, first in state government and now as a president of the Union of Concerned Scientists. Prior to joining the Union of Concerned Scientists in May 2014, Mr. Kimmell was the commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and during that time, he served as the chairman of the board of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, helping to prod the 9 member states to reduce power plant carbon emissions by almost 50% through 2020. And that Massachusetts is a state leader in our fight against climate change is due to individuals like Mr. Kimmell. He also served as general counsel at the Executive Office of the Energy and Environmental Affairs in Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick's administration, and his legal perspective is an invaluable asset, and he's been quoted widely in many different sources, and has also appeared on TV and on NPR. Personally, I'm just representing myself. I believe that given current fact-loose, fact-averse, and fact-denying statements made by our current federal administration, the work of individuals like Mr. Kimmell and of organizations like the Union of Concerned Scientists is of paramount importance. So I'm so happy that you are here today. And without further ado, I know you're here to listen to Mr. Kimmell, not to me. He will be presenting his talk on climate change and the age of Trump. Please.
Thank you, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Dean, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here, and this is a standing room only crowd, so I very much appreciate that. There's a lot of things I'm proud of in my life, but one of the most is that I have a daughter who attends Tufts University. She's a sophomore, Louisa, right over there. And I think she was good enough to bring a few of her friends here as well, so I really appreciate that. And Colin, it's great to see you again. Colin and I got to know each other very well because we went to the climate march in New York City. And there were so many people that we literally had to wait 4 hours in one spot just to be able to march, because that's how backed up the march was. So we got to know each other pretty well, and I'm really delighted to be invited here and to have a chance to talk to all of you. So regrettably, I'm going to have to start with a dark cloud, but I promise that there'll be some silver lining in this talk as well. The dark cloud, there's no point in sugarcoating this, is the combination of 4 words: climate change and Donald Trump. The silver lining is that there are opportunities that we can get from resisting what we think is going to happen that will allow us to actually build more power, broaden our movement, and revitalize it, so that if we can stem the damage, we can actually end up ahead. if things go the right way. So I'm going to start with the dark cloud, and then I'm going to turn to the silver lining. To me, and I say this without hyperbole and exaggeration, we face the biggest threat to our enlightened democracy than we have ever faced as a country, certainly in my lifetime. And I think there are three elements to this threat: a factless presidency, a captive Congress, and a very confused citizenry. Let's start with the factless presidency. So this is what Donald Trump had to say about climate change back in 2012, and although he denied actually saying that, there's a tweet that proves that he did say it, that he thinks climate change, global warming, was created by the Chinese government in order to make the U.S. Less competitive. We've seen now, since candidate Trump became President Trump, a series of complete disregard of facts. In fact, his spokesperson Kellyanne Conway, has invented this phrase, alternate facts. And alternate facts is the thread that connects many things we have seen since Mr. Trump has become president. Everything from the claim that President Obama has wiretapped his phones, to the claim that we need to deny immigrants from 7 countries the opportunity to come to the United States, even though there is no evidence that immigrants from these particular countries have caused any harm, to claims about massive voter fraud in the election, and even to stuff that's stupid, like whether it was actually raining during the time that President Trump gave his inaugural address. And those of us who have called out these alternative facts have been branded enemies of the people. That's what Mr. Trump had to say about the New York Times and CNN. So we have the factless presidency, and we have to also recognize that we have a Congress that is uniquely captive to special interests in a way that it really has never been. And part of that has to do with this 2010 Supreme Court opinion that allows corporations to give unlimited money to candidates and to do it in a way that evades public scrutiny. And this Congress, for the last 8 years, has been aching to deregulate. They've been aching to overturn a lot of the rules that President Obama put in place. And the only thing that was standing in their way for those 8 years was President Obama's veto pen, which we no longer have. And Congress's desire is to essentially transfer power away from the federal agencies that are armed with experts and scientists and are making policy based on the facts, and transfer that power back to Congress, where every one of these issues becomes a political football, and in which vested interests start out with an advantage. And the third part of the scenario is a very confused citizenry. You probably all know this is a picture of the guy who heard on a radio station that Hillary Clinton was operating a child sex ring out of the basement of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. And so he showed up with a machine gun to address this, only to learn that, of course, the story was fake. And what's scary is that many citizens have lost trust in any institution to help them separate fact from fiction, whether it's the media, whether it's the government, even the university. And so when you take these three things together, the president's disregard for facts, the desire of Congress to be captive to industry, and the confusion that citizens have about what's true and what's not true, you can get some terrible results across the board, not only on climate, but on health insurance, on immigration, on tax, and trade policy. And so now I'm going to focus a little bit on what we might see happening on the climate front if we don't fight back. I'll start with the Paris Agreement. I imagine people here are generally familiar with it. It's the single most important thing we've done as a world community to address climate change. 197 countries, all agreeing to a long-term goal to hold temperature increases to well below 2 degrees centigrade, an agreement that countries would put together pledges now, setting forth what they intend to do, but make those pledges more and more ambitious over time, and a whole way of monitoring and reporting and verifying so that we can tell whether countries are doing what they say.
So the United States played an enormous leadership role in making this agreement happen. We pledged as part of our agreement that we would cut our emissions of greenhouse gases by 26 to 28% by 2025. We agreed to come back with an even more ambitious pledge for 2030, and we agreed to help the developing countries, the poorest countries, decarbonize as well. So that's what we agreed to do. And as everyone knows, that treaty never went through the Senate. It's never been ratified because it never would have been if we tried. And so there's a question really about whether it's legally binding. And there's certainly a question about whether President Trump will pull out of the Paris Agreement. And I don't have the answer to that. It seems to be that there are warring factions within his administration. So that's a question mark, whether he'll pull out of the agreement or not. But here's what we do know for sure. Both as a candidate and now as a president, the president and his new EPA administrator, Scott Pruitt, are busy working to repeal the policies that we need to rely upon to actually meet our Paris pledge. And two of those are on the chopping block, and an announcement is expected next week. The one on the left-hand side is, of course, carbon emissions from power plants. And we have put in place a clean power plan that for the first time caps those emissions and drives them down. On the right-hand side are cars. We have fuel economy standards that will give us much better mileage from our cars and therefore lower the greenhouse gases that come from transportation. In fact, those are the two biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in our country, and those two regulations alone will reduce our carbon footprint by billions of tons. But the problem is these are just regulations. They're not in law. President Obama issued them, and just as he can do them unilaterally, President Trump can undo them unilaterally. And so the combination of weakening or repealing these and various other actions that the president has talked about in his campaign are quite dramatic. Let me give you a sense of what the numbers look like. So that line is our actual greenhouse gas emissions from 2005 to 2015, and you can see it's going in the right direction. It's going down. This green line depicts where we would get to if we kept all of the Obama policies in place. And you can see that by 2025, we're getting in striking distance of meeting the pledge we made in Paris. We're not going to get quite to 26 to 28%, but we're going to get close. So some analysts have calculated what it would look like if all the things that President Trump has proposed to do actually happen. And that's the brown line. And you can see that if all that comes to pass, we're not going to get close to meeting the pledge we made to the world. And in fact, it's quite possible that emissions will be higher rather than lower as a result of this. So that's a total stall out in progress. That is a realistic worst case scenario that we could face here. But we're also worried about what I call the scorched earth, the things that a Trump administration could do that would make it very, very hard for a future president or a future Congress to undo. One of those things is a particularly nasty law called the Congressional Review Act. It's a law that allows Congress to overturn regulations that were issued recently. But the real kicker of it is, if the Congress does that, the agency is never allowed to do anything relating to that subject matter again without Congress's permission. So to give you an example, there's a rule that the Bureau of Land Management put into effect that says when you drill for oil on federal lands, you have to capture the gas that comes from those operations. You can't just let it go into the atmosphere. Well, Congress is trying to overturn that law, that rule, and if they do, that agency will be precluded forever again unless Congress changes its mind from dealing with the problem of methane, which is a huge one. So that's one type of scorched earth. A second are a host of anti-science laws that are going through Congress. One is called the RAINS Act. That's a law that says when an agency makes a regulation, it doesn't go into effect until both houses of Congress have approved it. And that may not sound like that big a deal, but I will tell you it's one of the most radical changes in policy that we've had in 80 years. Because our level of government says that we have agencies that have experts and scientists making these technical decisions. And when they make them, they're subject to court review. They have to be done with public involvement. But Congress doesn't get a chance to weigh in on these things. And the problem with allowing Congress to do that is that it will basically paralyze all of this work. Because Congress, it's very difficult to get any law passed in Congress, and any regulation that imposes any real costs on industry would be bitterly opposed. So if a law like that got put in place, even if we had the best president coming in to succeed Mr. Trump, he or she would have her hands tied in trying to address the damage that was done. So these scorched earth possibilities are very unnerving. We also fear that what the president can't achieve with changes in the law can be achieved by cutting the budget of these agencies. And you've probably heard that there's a proposal to take 24% off of EPA's budget and essentially shut down its Office of Research. Major cuts in NOAA, Department of Energy, Ag Department. These are all agencies that work on climate change, that fund the science, that fund the policy, that fund the thinking about preparation. And so they could be crippled through the budget cuts. And frankly, we also worry about government censorship of science. We've already seen some of it in play. At the Department of Energy, there was a questionnaire that the Trump transition team circulated demanding to know the names of everyone in the Department of Energy who had worked on climate change. Why do they need to know that? There's a website at the Department of State that deals with international climate change efforts. It's been taken down. There's been threats to EPA scientists that they're not allowed to speak publicly about their work, or that their reports will need to get vetted by political appointees before they can be made public. And perhaps even worse, I think we're seeing the beginning of a new form of climate denial, which I call climate denial 3.0. Climate denial 1.0 was the mantra we heard a number of years ago in which we saw from candidate Trump that the whole thing is a hoax. That really hasn't gone over very well, and most Americans don't accept that. And so then we had climate denial 2.0, which was a lot of people were saying, politicians were saying, I'm not a scientist, so I can't tell you either way whether climate change is real. Now we have climate denial 3.0, which is a little bit more subtle, but it gets the same result, which is something's going on with the climate. I agree that the Earth is warming up, but I don't really know if it's a man-made thing or whether it's something else that's causing it, and I can't really measure exactly what the impact's going to be. But the punchline is the same. Therefore, let's not do anything about it. So whatever version it is, that's the result. And I have to tell you, just today, the head of our EPA, the person in charge of the climate agenda, said that he doesn't actually think carbon dioxide is a primary contributor to global warming. So this is what we're dealing with. And one of the fears that I have, for the last 20 years or so, the federal government has been gathering data about climate change, helping us understand its causes, helping us understand its impacts, helping us understand how to prepare for it. Imagine if we took a U-turn and the government all of a sudden started funding all the crackpot alternative theories about climate change and became a propaganda machine of doubt. I mean, that would be a very, very scary prospect. And you may say I'm being paranoid to think that could happen, but as I started out by saying, this is an alternative facts presidency. And his alternative fact is that climate change isn't real. So imagine having the instrumentation of government being used to try to prove that. Okay, so that's the dark cloud. That's where we end up if all these things come to pass and if we don't fight it. So now a little bit of silver lining. The silver lining to me is that in lightning speed, a resistance is forming. You saw it in the Women's March. The day after the inauguration, millions of people all over the country, all over the world, out marching. You saw it in this new movement called the indivisible movement that's springing up all over the country, where people who have never been involved in politics in their life are showing up at town halls, they're showing up at congressional offices, they're writing letters, they're signing petitions, they're being heard. You saw it in the incredibly brave people from the State Department. 1,000 employees signed a petition saying that they didn't agree with the Muslim ban. 800 employees of the EPA risked their jobs and went out and marched and protested the appointment of Scott Pruitt. And you saw the resistance in the lawsuits that sprang up hours after the Muslim ban was formed. So we have what I would say is a coalition of fact-based people. It's broad and it's strong, and I'm proud as part of the Union of Concerned Scientists to be part of that. What we are doing now is mobilizing scientists all over the country. We have a science network of 20,000 scientists, up from 17,000 scientists in 1 week, by the way. We have 500,000 members and 100,000 key donors, and we are mobilizing these people. I have never seen the science community so alarmed, but also energized. We are protecting government scientists who are facing abuse and the suppression of their work. And most of all, we are exposing those types of tactics, because we know in government that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And one of the things I think all of us have noticed is the Trump administration is pretty touchy about bad press. So exposing it is key. Our goal is to try to block as many of the scorched earth bills as we can in the Senate. So things like taking away the authority of the EPA to do something about climate change under the Clean Air Act, or passing some of those anti-science bills, or cutting the budget to the bone. And our odds in the Senate are not that bad. 52 Republicans, 48 Democrats. So the key is to try to hold the Democrats together and prevent movements away, and then get 3 or 4 or 5 Republicans on board to join us. And so that is something that we are focusing on like a laser beam. And when I talk a little bit about later about things that you can do, I'll come back to that. We're also going to do whatever we can to block these regulatory rollbacks. I did say that the president has the authority to repeal the Clean Power Plan or the fuel economy standards, but he can't do it with the stroke of a pen. It requires going through a whole rulemaking process, giving people an opportunity to respond, and most importantly, there has to be a legal basis to it. You can't just repeal a rule because you don't like it. And so our role will be to make sure that the evidence is clear, that there's no reason to change these rules, but also to call out the people who are really working behind the scenes to get these rollbacks: oil companies, coal companies, and car companies, and to make them feel the sting of publicity for what they're trying to do. Now, we're going to lose some of these battles. We will win some of them as well. And for those that we lose, we're going to go into the courtroom. This is a picture of Atticus Finch, or actually Gregory Peck playing Atticus Finch. Louisa knows that this is a hero of mine. Courts are really important right now because courts are fact-based arenas. And we saw this in the litigation over the Muslim ban. That Muslim ban was put out, and there was a lot of rhetoric about how it was keeping America safe. But the judges weren't interested in rhetoric. They wanted to know from Mr. Trump's lawyers, what threats do these 7 countries actually pose? What's wrong with the vetting procedures that we have in place now? I mean, why should we do this? And, the Trump lawyers came up empty-handed, and they lost that lawsuit. So facts matter. They matter in the courtroom. And I expect that if the Trump administration tries to repeal all of these environmental standards, they're going to face a similarly skeptical court that's going to demand a basis for the action. But we're also going to do something else that isn't usually associated with scientists. We're going to march. These are 2 young scientists at UCS. This is from the Climate March in New York. We are co-sponsoring the March for Science on April 22nd down in Washington. We're also co-sponsoring the People's Climate March a week later. And I can't emphasize enough how important these marches are. This is the real opportunity we have as a country to get out and resist. And I just wanted to underline that the People's Climate March, it's for climate, but it's also for jobs and justice. And part of the theory of this march is to link hands between the climate movement and other movements, because so many other communities are under attack by so many different things. And this is the part that gives me hope, because we've never really done that before. But now we are under attack. We know that we have to have a big tent. We know that we need diversity and inclusion and equity, and we've got to make that a central part. And so I am inspired by that opportunity, and I think that maybe, just maybe, marches like this will enable us to grow a more powerful movement. So that's where adversity does sometimes give us the silver lining. And there's a couple of other silver linings that I want to point out. We do, when it comes to climate, occupy a position of strength. And that's because the clean energy economy, that's a train that really has left the station. And while I think that Trump could slow it down, I don't think he can stop the train. There's a lot going on in our favor, and let me say a few words about some of those trends. This is kind of a complicated chart, but here's the punchline. This is new energy capacity additions, and you can see in 2015, if you add up the green, which is wind, and the dark blue, which is solar, we're now building more wind and solar than we are fossil-fueled power plants. So that's exactly the trend line we should be on, and we're on it. That's a great trend. A second trend, which is kind of an amazing success story that really has not been told well enough, our peak energy usage in the United States happened in 2007. That's the blue line. Yet our economy has grown significantly since that time. So we have decoupled economic growth from energy use. We are becoming a much more energy efficient nation. And the third trend is that the price of batteries that go in electric cars is plunging. And it's anticipated that in the early part of the 2020s, it'll cost the same amount to buy an electric vehicle as a gas-fired car. And that means that for any consumer who buys an electric vehicle, they're saving money the moment they leave the shop, because it costs much less to charge your battery than it does to fill up your tank. So these are some wonderful trends that are moving in our favor. Another trend that's really moving in our favor is the leadership we're seeing, not at the federal level, but at the state level. So here are 4 states which in the last year have passed extremely ambitious climate laws, obligating them to get to 40 to 50% renewable energy by 2030. That goes way beyond, by the way, what the federal Clean Power Plan required. But it's not just these coastal blue states that are in this game. Illinois just passed a similar bill in December. The state of Georgia has the second best incentives for electric vehicles in the country. The state of North Carolina is number 4 in solar. Texas now has so much wind energy at so low prices that it's literally giving wind energy away for free at night. And the state of Iowa is now 40% renewable. So this is a phenomenal thing. And then now in some of these states, it's not because their governors are waking up and thinking they want to do something about climate change. It's because the economics are so good. It's because so many jobs are being created, and so many ranchers and farmers and landowners are getting paid good money to have these wind turbines and solar panels on their property. So this is working. We see it, and so what can states do? I showed you that map. You saw that there were about 10 energy leaders. There's a lot of states that are lagging behind. But states can set climate goals for themselves. They can set renewable energy standards that require the utility companies to buy renewable energy. They can do the same on energy efficiency. They can give incentives to people who buy electric vehicles. They can control energy usage with building codes. They can do carbon pricing and cap and trade, which we have here in New England. And they can invest in public transportation. So many of the things that we would like Donald Trump to do and which he won't do can be done on the state level. This is also true of cities. Cities are where some of the best climate change combating tools are happening. We're seeing it in the zoning codes that cities are doing that get rid of the sprawl. We're seeing it in the way they deal with food waste and sending it to composting and anaerobic digesters rather than landfills. We're seeing it in investments in public transportation and bike paths. So cities are a key way that we can make progress on climate change. And I'm actually really proud to report that the business community is stepping up to the table. Hundreds and hundreds of companies have recognized that it's in their interest to come out on climate. So they've signed declarations like this one that came before Paris. But perhaps even more hearteningly, they're really putting their money where their mouth is. They're buying renewable energy. They're becoming more energy efficient. So the businesses are stepping up as they should. So what can you do? What can you do? So I would say a few things. One is there's always the opportunity to lead by example. I know that Tufts has a record it should be very proud of in terms of energy efficiency and various things to become a more sustainable university. But there's things that Tufts can do. I know many people here have been urging Tufts to divest. I certainly want to add my voice to that. At UCS, we have divested. It wasn't that hard. We actually saved money because of it, because some of the stocks that we got rid of have plunged. And I would say on divestment, to me, it's not really a question of whether to divest. It's a question of when to divest. Because I think all of you know that in order for us to meet those goals in Paris, about 2/3 of the reserves of coal, oil, and gas have to stay in the ground. And that means that oil company, gas company, coal company stocks are a bubble right now, which eventually is going to burst. And so the question for this university is whether to sell off those assets while the market is still valuing them highly, or wait until this bubble bursts. And I think the economically prudent thing to do, in addition to the morally right thing to do, is to divest now. So that's definitely something that you are right to work on. I would urge you as students to join this indivisible movement. Particularly if you live, when you're not at Tufts, in red or purple states. This movement is catching on, and it's having an impact, so there's going to be opportunities to visit your members of Congress, your senators, your congressmen. You can also work on climate in your home state. I showed you that map. There are a lot of clean energy leaders. There's also clean energy laggards. So if you live in a state that really hasn't stepped up to the plate, put pressure on them. There's no rocket science here. There's no secret sauce. We know how to do it. It's a question of getting it done. That's also true of your city, where you have an opportunity to influence local policy. I would strongly urge you all to come to the Science March on April 22nd and to come to the People's Climate March on April 29th. I know it's a little hard to have two marches so close in time, but they're both important. And by all means, we would love to have you all join UCS as members. It's $25 to do it. And if you are a science-oriented person, you can join our science network as well, which gives scientists a particular opportunity to engage. So I want to conclude by talking about Martin Luther King, another hero of mine. He's a hero for a lot of reasons, but mostly because he had the bravery to march in the face of danger and in the face of overwhelming odds. And here's what he said about his struggle and why he did it. Quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." So I believe that's true. In my own life, I've seen many, many examples of that. And I want to believe that that's true when it comes to climate change. But right now, the arc is bending in the wrong direction. And it's going to take an enormous weight to bend that arc in the other direction. And unfortunately, time is our enemy on this one. We don't have an unlimited time to bend that curve down. We have very little time. And we cannot let Donald Trump and we cannot let a captive Congress steal that time away. So this is the challenge of our time. There is no time like the present to get involved, to march, to organize, to be heard. If not students, then who else? This is the only planet we got, and there is no plan B. So, thank you, and if we have some time, I'll be happy to take some questions.
We do have time for questions, and please wait for the mic, and I will bring it around to you. But before I do that, speaking of EPA, I just want to make a quick announcement that Gina McCarthy, the former head of EPA, is coming to Tufts on April 19th, Wednesday, at 7:30 p.m. in this same room. So, and it's being sponsored by the X College as their Hanover lecture. She's going to be talking about voices from the edge. So put in your calendar, come see Gina McCarthy. It's a perfect segue to her talk. So, but I want to now open it up to questions.
Thank you very much for a wonderful speech. Just want to make a quick announcement. The students who work with me in the Lunch and Learn half-credit course will meet at the back of the room after this talk. And I wanted to ask you, Trump is often compared, I teach environmental communication here, environmental policy here at Tufts. Trump is often compared to the Italian politician, Mr. Berlusconi. And one of the things that worries me greatly is the challenge of reframing a Trump or a Berlusconi. And I don't see anything beyond resist and indivisible that have so far arisen as counter frames. And I feel the Union of Concerned Scientists is really one of the places we can look for counter frames. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think that's a great question. Did everyone hear the question? Yeah. So I think it's a broad question. How do we communicate effectively in the age of Trump, and what are our counter frames? I do think that this meme of alternative facts is one of the counter frames. And it's a not unfair way of taking away credibility from the speaker. Because if he says that it was sunny while he was giving a speech and everyone can see that it's raining, which is what it was, if he's going to mislead about little things, you can assume he's going to mislead about bigger things. So that's one piece. A second piece, and a really big challenge for us from a communications perspective, but one that we understand, is that the climate change debate is very, very abstract to a lot of Americans. And they have other things on their mind than the fact that the polar ice caps may be melting and we may have sea level rise in 25 years. So part of the challenge is to get very, very granular with people and very direct about impact. So for example, when we talk about the Clean Power Plan, if I'm talking to more of a lay audience, I'll talk about the climate change, but I'll also talk about air pollution and asthma and kids who can't breathe because they live near a coal-burning plant and things like that. So that is clear. And then the other piece that is clear to me is that Americans are profoundly suspicious about corporations getting special privileges. And somehow they were led to believe that Trump was actually going to drain the swamp and all of this corruption was going to go away. And in fact, exactly the opposite's happened. He put a guy in charge at EPA who clearly is beholden to the oil and the gas industry. And so those are things that we're going to talk about over and over again. And he is giving us an example every day of that. And so those are some of the tools. But I have learned that speaking, very logically, very slowly, very carefully, very clearly gets you only part of the way. You have to appeal to people at an emotional level. That's what Mr. Trump has done so well. But I think we have some tools and some themes that we can do that too. But we've got to get better at it.
Thank you. So I just want to let you know I've been in Denver, Colorado at the training that was Climate Reality Leadership Corps training, 4 intensive days with former Vice President Al Gore. And what I was with 1,000 people in an auditorium. There were 100 tables of 10. And absolutely everybody who came, 40 countries around the world were represented. I can't tell you specifically how many states, but they said people from almost every state. And so I echo your passion, your statement that people people's passion has been aroused. One of the things that the Gore team said to us, and every single climate reality leader, which I am now one, it's a daunting thing, but I'm standing up and I'm talking to you all. I get nervous and I shake and I have to really think about it. But I care about this deeply, and I know every single one of you here cares about this deeply. And some of you may even be here because you wonder what the heck these people who are talking about climate change are all about, and why even bother? But I want to know what the other side's thinking, so here I am. But the point that he said, and I think you would agree, this is a nonpartisan issue. This reaches across all people, all animals, every landscape, and in fact, what's happening is that there are a lot of forces that are converging. We can't prove that humans are causing all of it, but a lot of people know enough to know that bad stuff is happening. There are people who believe that we could make less bad stuff happen if enough of us can get together and mobilize and stop what's going on. So I have an idea, and I've talked too long, but I have one idea to share with you, and that is I am an American, first and foremost. Think about that, what that means to you. I was very lucky, in my opinion, to be born an American citizen, but in fact, it's a complicated thing to be an American citizen because stuff in America happens that I completely disagree with. And I do not think that corporations should trample on the environment and be able to make profit at the public land's expense, at my expense, etc. So I have passion. I care about stuff like this. Our government is under attack. What I stand for as a woman, I'm afraid now that rights that I have struggled so hard to be making change in my direction, they are at risk and they're likely to be taken away. And so I'm going to fight for what it means to me to be an American, and what I've been doing since I started the conference is every single taxi cab ride, Uber ride, getting on the light rail in Denver. I've been out of my stuff with my private, we're all in our private bubbles, and I've been saying, hi, I've just been in the most amazing thing, and I don't know where you are on this, and state a fact or state something as a question and engage with people. And what I have found is absolutely incredible. More people than we have any clue care about this subject. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Can apply to be a climate reality leader. Great.
I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So I work here in the Office of Sustainability. We're a 3-person team, so we work on sustainability at Tufts in our operations. But my question is about our state, Massachusetts. We have a huge opportunity to be a leader. We have such, progressive folks in the State House. How do you feel that Governor Baker has been doing with all the commitments that we have? How do you think he's doing with that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I am very, very proud of our state. We have really been a nation leader, everything from being #1 in the most energy efficient state in the country 5 years in a row, to creating that regional greenhouse gas cap and trade program, and a variety of things. And one of the things I'm super excited about is we're about to launch a massive offshore wind industry. Not the Cape Wind project, which unfortunately got sliced and diced, but bigger, better projects 15 miles offshore. So I'm very, very proud of what we've done. I have actually, I'll give you an honest answer. I think that Governor Baker has been, quite good from the environmental perspective. Not perfect, but I was worried when I left state government that the incoming administration would undo a lot of the things that we did, and they really haven't. They signed a strong energy bill, and Governor Baker put out an executive order which says climate change is real and we've got to address it. And, frankly, if more Republican governors and senators and Republicans sign something like that, we could make some real progress. So I'm going to say not perfect, but pretty satisfied.
Hi, thank you again for your lecture. And I'm a senior studying environmental engineering here, and so my question is, you mentioned the marches a couple of times and a few coming up, and I know that what I'm thinking about right now is like Standing Rock and all the atrocities happening there, and I'm wondering how the science community and those concerned about environmental impacts can support like existing movements that are already being done by people impacted by climate change and other environmental concerns.
Well, I mean, that's a great question. The question is about Standing Rock and I think Keystone and other particular environmental battles and how scientists can get involved. You know, we have been supporting all of those protests and movements as well. We've been writing about them. We've been pointing out, you know, how flawed the process was, which led to the selection of this particular pipeline route and the threats that it posed to the aquifer. I think that's very important. I think having the science community speak out about these things is so critical because here, I started out by saying people have lost trust. One group that actually continues to have the trust of most Americans are doctors and scientists. So when scientists get up and speak, they validate what others are saying, and that voice is very, very important, which is why I think having this separate March on Science is so important. So I think that there's a real role for scientists on this, and one of my hopes is that slowly over time, academia will understand that for a scientist, the criteria shouldn't just be publish, publish, publish. The criteria should be publish, communicate, engage. And I would like to see academia really understand that and give scientists the latitude that they need to be the effective spokespeople they can be in their communities. And I think for that to happen, some of the norms and rules that surround academia need to change.
We have a question from online, so I'm going to read the question from someone listening. When talking with climate skeptics, what's the best way to keep from getting stuck in unproductive debates over facts and credibility? For example, how do you know that 98% of climate scientists agree humans are affecting the climate? How do we say because it's common knowledge without opening ourselves to accusation or just making up facts we want to hear?
All right, so that to me is the $64,000 question. How do you communicate effectively with people who don't agree with you and are not likely to be swayed? And first of all, there's no magic bullet here. It is hard. I've done it. A lot of people have done it. But here's some things which we try to do which have been successful. So one is to meet the person where they are and not say, you know, you're just an idiot for being skeptical about this. It's so obvious, you know, how can you not get it? But you say, all right, I understand that you're skeptical, but you know, I'm skeptical about whether my house is going to burn down. I don't really think it will, but I take out insurance because I want to guard against that risk. And investing in renewable energy and clean energy is kind of an insurance policy just in case those climate scientists are right. We'll be in a position to deal with it. So that's one thing. Try to talk about something else in their life that has risk and uncertainty and how they deal with that and try to give them that. That sometimes is effective. Sometimes highlighting the economics, the fact that things like solar and wind and electric vehicles are great whether you believe in climate science or not. They're creating jobs. They're cleaning up the air. They're putting people to work. They're keeping up our technological superiority. So that sometimes is effective. And then I'm aware of the work of one climate scientist, Katharine Hayhoe. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's an evangelical Christian from Texas. And she can talk to a skeptical audience about climate science like no one I've ever seen. And she starts by talking about the earth and God and the creation. And she talks about if you have a baby that's overheated, you don't keep throwing blankets on top of the baby. And she comes up with very effective ways to disarm and relate it to people's lives. So all of those things work. But I think the biggest problem is that people are attaching all sorts of other baggage to climate science. People think that if they accept the science of climate change, government's going to take over the economy, all sorts of things like that. And you've got to somehow detach the scientific conversation from the rest of it and get away from what we have now, which is this sort of identity politics, where people are unwilling to look at the evidence because they're afraid of what it would mean for their deeply held beliefs. So we do all of those things and more, and some people we're successful with, some people we're not, and we have to acknowledge there's probably 35 or 40% of the people that we're not going to persuade on this issue, which is generally true of other issues as well.
Hi, thank you for coming. I here am a member of Tufts Divest, so if anybody's interested in getting involved, talk to me afterwards. But my question was, when you talk about silver linings, what I think is so great about divestment is that it's an opportunity for institutions to step up where the national political will is dwindling. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about UCS's decision to divest.
Well, sure. We felt very strongly that we had to practice what we preached. And we are supporting divestment movements in universities and elsewhere. So we took a look at our portfolio. Our fossil fuel holdings weren't very big to begin with. They were about 5 or 6%. And it was complicated because they're in mutual funds. So it's not like we own, stock in Peabody Energy. We have mutual funds, which are intermingled. But we worked with our financial advisors, and in the market are a large number of investment products now which are fossil-free. And so we, over time, sold our shares in the mutual funds that had the fossil elements and bought up the other alternative vehicles. And now our fossil holdings, there may be a little bit, but it's under 1%. And my point is, I'm not saying that's exactly the same situation that Tufts faced, but it really wasn't that hard. It just took the will to do it. The market is moving in that direction anyway. There's a lot of green investors out there that want to have fossil-free holdings. And I think, from a symbolic perspective, if nothing else, it's important, and it's a good cause on your part.
Just on your way out, I'm going to the next question, but if you want to learn more about Gina McCarthy's talk, there's cards on both sides of the room. Get them on your way out.
I'll say a plug for Gina. She is a hero and also one of the most charming and funny people I've ever met, so I strongly encourage you to go hear her.
Hi. So I was thinking about what you said about the upcoming climate march and how it's intended to be also about jobs and justice. And I think that the climate movement has struggled a lot with going beyond just paying lip service to intersectionality and these other issues. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, if you think that there are more specific ways that the climate movement can really connect to some other things going on right now.
Well, first of all, I think you phrased it perfectly. I think there has been an absence of intersectionality and an absence of connection, and that has weakened our effectiveness. So I think we have some real natural allies here, and in particular at UCS, we're focusing very, very hard on working with environmental justice communities, the communities that have way too many chemical factories or power plants or hazardous waste sites in their communities. And we're trying to build some bridges with those communities and offer them some of our scientific expertise and work with them in that way. And that's been a really great partnership. Another thing we've been focusing on is how the communities that are most vulnerable to climate change impacts are often disadvantaged communities. Communities that there's a lack of funding going to pay for climate preparedness. There's language barriers. There's evacuation barriers in the event of a big storm. And so we put a report out. We worked with the community to do it, to the federal government, suggesting that we need an index of vulnerability for communities to determine priority for federal disaster planning. So those are some examples, and those partnerships have made us much, much stronger. We've learned a lot from being part of it, and I think it's helped those groups elevate the priority of climate change as well. So I think strength is coming from that, and I hope that even as we're mired in these battles against the Trump administration, that we don't lose sight of that partnership. Because from my point of view, the budget impacts that will come from millions of people losing their health care, or losing food stamps, or losing the ability to go to a Planned Parenthood clinic, are the same as the threats to the climate. They're all part of the same thing, and we've got to resist them collectively.
One last question. If I may, I'm so glad that Miranda spoke first, because I, too, wanted to raise the issue of climate justice, but I'm going to take the risk of offering a constructive criticism to your last slide of the trend of increasing temperatures. Climate disruption is what we ought not lose sight of. While that trend of increasing temperatures occurs, we already know that disruptive extreme events will occur throughout the world. To the extent that our states and our cities are places where we live and we can have an impact, we need to be preparing to adapt to those circumstances. If he were to be able to show you the incidence of extreme events during that same 10-year period, even if we are successful, if by success we mean we're stopping the Trump administration from doing the scorched earth, we will still have the trends upwards, and we'll still have the trends of disruptive events. And the people most vulnerable to those events are low income, usually, those least prepared to adapt to the circumstances, and they're in every community that you know of, except for the gated ones, perhaps. So it's an idea that I want to encourage the students to leave with, because to the extent that you mobilize, as you should, as we encourage you to do, you should also prepare in your locations, in your homes, in every place, because when those events occur, they impact residents, they impact neighborhoods, they impact the animals in your life, the livelihood, the livestock, and so on. And every one of those conditions is harmful. So if I may, in that regard, to the extent that you had an additional slide that showed that kind of patterning of disruption, and that's what's coming, even if we stop the trend about the laws, those events are still coming.
No disagreement from me.
Well, let's take this opportunity to thank Ken Kimmell once again for a really thought-provoking. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I will actually be in DC for the climate march, so I'm kind of curious to know if you're thinking about going, maybe meet me in the front for a few minutes, and we could just sort of strategize if we want to make it a Tusk contingent. I'll be joining the George Washington University contingent.